At my sister's wedding, I wasn't just left out. I was put on display. My name is Emily. I'm 29, and for my sister Lydia's big day, she seated me at a table in the far back corner of the ballroom. It was a small round table set for one. It was a spotlight disguised as a courtesy. From that table, I could hear the whispers of other guests, their pitying glances cutting deeper than the band's cheerful music ever could. I was the family failure, and my sister had given everyone a front row seat. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. To understand the isolation of that table, you have to understand the architecture of my family, a structure designed long ago to display one daughter while hiding the other. Lydia was born with a spotlight already on her, bathing her in a golden glow of affection and attention. I was born 2 years earlier, a quiet, beige-colored room where everyone stored their forgotten things. She was the sun. I was the shadow she cast, and the length of that shadow depended entirely on how brightly she was shining. It wasn't a secret. It was a fact, as simple and unchangeable as the weather. My parents loved us both, I suppose, but they were in love with Lydia. She was a spectacle, a constant source of drama and delight. I was just dependable, and dependability, I learned early on, is a quiet virtue that earns you little more than the expectation of more dependability. I remember one specific Tuesday afternoon when I was 10. The air in our house was still and heavy with the smell of my mom's lemon cleaner. I came home from school clutching a small heavy trophy, its gold-painted plastic cool against my sweaty palms. I had won the county-wide spelling bee. The final word was chrysanthemum. I can still feel the shape of the letters in my mind, the silent H, the tricky I. I had practiced for weeks. My bedroom floor littered with flashcards while Lydia was at ballet, her life a whirlwind of pink tulle and applause. I walked into the kitchen, my chest tight with a pride so fragile I was afraid to breathe. My mom was at the counter sorting mail. My dad was in the living room, the crinkle of his newspaper the only sound. I won, I said, my voice coming out as a squeak. I held up the trophy. It had a little figure of a scholar on top holding a book. My mom looked up from a credit card bill. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said, her smile warm but brief. She didn't take the trophy, didn't examine it. Her attention was already drifting back to the envelope in her hand. "That's our smart girl." I walked into the living room. "Dad, look. I won the spelling bee." He lowered his paper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He squinted at the trophy. "Well, look at that. Good job, Emily. Knew you had it in you." And then the newspaper went back up. A paper wall between his world and my small victory. I stood there for a moment, the trophy starting to feel heavy and foolish in my hands. There was no celebration, no excited phone calls to grandparents, no suggestion of going out for ice cream. An achievement, I was learning, didn't really count if no one made a fuss. I took the trophy to my room and set it on my desk, where it sat beside a stack of textbooks. It felt less like a prize and more like just another piece of school equipment. An hour later, the front door slammed open. It was Lydia, home from ballet practice, her face red and streaked with tears. She threw her pink dance bag onto the floor with a dramatic thud. "I didn't get it," she wailed, collapsing onto the living room sofa. "Madison got the part of the lead flower. I'm just a stupid petal." Instantly, the house came to life. The newspaper rustled to the floor. The mail was abandoned on the counter. My parents rushed to her side, their faces etched with a profound shared concern. "It was a family emergency." "Oh, sweetie, what happened?" My mom cooed, stroking Lydia's hair. "Your instructor must be blind," my dad declared, his voice full of righteous anger. "You're the best dancer in that class, and everyone knows it." They spent the next hour dissecting the grave injustice that had occurred in the kindergarten ballet class. My dad called the pizza place and ordered Lydia's favorite extra pepperoni with pineapple, a combination I despised. My mom drew her a warm bath with bubbles. Her smallest feelings were monumental events that required the full and immediate attention of our entire family. My spelling bee trophy, sitting alone in my quiet room, gathered dust. That night, eating a slice of pizza I had to pick the pineapple off of, I understood. My successes were footnotes. Lydia's disappointments were headlines. This dynamic solidified as we grew older. In high school, she was the cheerleader, the life of every party, her social calendar a complex document that dictated the rhythm of our household. I was the one in the honor society, the editor of the school newspaper, the girl with a perfect attendance record. My achievements were quiet, academic, and, to my family, boring. They were check marks on a list of expected duties, while Lydia's social victories were cause for celebration. I remember the night of my high school graduation. I was salutatorian, the second highest GPA in my entire class. I had a speech to give. I had practiced it in my mirror for a week, my hands shaking. My parents were there, of course. They sat in the third row. But during my speech, a speech about a future built on quiet dedication, I saw them. My dad was scrolling through his phone. My mom was whispering to my aunt. And I just knew, they were talking about Lydia's upcoming Sweet 16. They were more excited about planning her party than they were about watching my graduation. After the ceremony, they gave me a brief hug and a card with $100 bill in it. "We're so proud, honey," they said. An hour later, we were at a restaurant, not for my graduation dinner, but for a planning session with Lydia and her friends to decide on a theme for her party. I sat there in my cap and gown, a ghost at my own celebration. When I went to college on a partial academic scholarship, I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover the rest. I never asked them for money. I knew it was all being funneled into Lydia's experiences, her spring break trips to Cancun, her expensive sorority dues, her shopping sprees. When I graduated with honors and got my first job offer as a project manager, I called them, my voice buzzing with excitement. "That's great, honey," my mom said. "Construction? Are you sure about that? It sounds so dirty." "Your mother's right," my dad added. "It's a man's world, Emily. Don't you want a job where you can meet a nice young man?" They didn't see a career. They saw a dead end for my romantic prospects. Meanwhile, when Lydia graduated 2 years later with a communications degree and no job prospects, they threw her a lavish party and co-signed a lease on a beautiful apartment for her in the city. "She needs to be in a place where she can network," they explained. The Sunday dinners were the ultimate stage for this dynamic. It was where Lydia, now engaged to the wonderfully stable and wealthy Richard, would hold court. I, still single and living in a sensible condo I had bought myself, was her favorite topic. Just a few months before the wedding, we were all gathered around the dining table. The conversation turned to my work. "We closed the deal on the new community center this week," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "We're breaking ground on Monday. It's a huge project." Lydia dabbed her mouth with a napkin, her diamond ring catching the light. "That's nice, Em, all those buildings you're putting up. It's like you're literally building a wall around yourself." She smiled sweetly at my mother. "I worry. She pours everything into her job. It's not healthy to be alone so much." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "I'm not alone, Lydia. I have friends. I have a life. Work friends aren't the same thing," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "You need a man, Emily, a family. You're not getting any younger." I looked to my parents for support, but they just smiled weakly. "She's just looking out for you, dear," my mom said, her voice placating. "We all want you to be happy." Happy in their vocabulary meant married. My happiness, the quiet satisfaction of my career, the peace of my own home, the loyalty of my friends, was an alien concept. It was an invalid form of happiness. My role as maid of honor was the final perfect illustration of my place in the family. It was a title in name only. When I offered to help with the wedding plans, Lydia would laugh. "Oh, Emily, this stuff would just bore you. It's all about flowers and feelings. You're more of a spreadsheets and concrete kind of girl." I was excluded from dress shopping, from the cake tasting, from the bachelorette party in Vegas. My only function was to be a silent, open checkbook. Every few weeks my mother would call. "Honey, the deposit for the venue is due and Lydia is just so stressed." I would transfer the money, $5,000 for the photographer, $2,000 for the flowers, another $1,000 for the custom monogram napkins. I was funding a party I wasn't truly invited to, a celebration of the life they valued over mine. I was the dependable foundation, hidden underground, upon which Lydia's beautiful, glittering life was being built. And on her wedding day, she was going to make sure everyone saw the beautiful building, while I was relegated to the basement. The wedding day itself was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a perfectly orchestrated performance of my designated role as the family's resident failure. The ceremony was held in a grand, historic church with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that threw jewels of light across the pews. I stood beside Lydia at the altar, the scratchy, ill-fitting peach bridesmaid dress a constant, irritating reminder of my secondary status. I held her heavy bouquet of white peonies and smiled until my face felt like a plaster mask. I watched her marry Richard, a man whose gentle kindness seemed almost tragic in the face of my sister's casual cruelty. He looked at her like she was the sun, and I suppose she was, but he had no idea about the cold shadows she was capable of casting. As I stood there, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on the wedding party. I knew what they saw: a beautiful bride, a handsome groom, a line of smiling bridesmaids, and then me. The maid of honor who looked a little older than the rest, a little more tired, the only one standing alone. Even the groomsmen had partners in the audience. I was an island. The reception was where Lydia's artistry truly shone. We moved to a lavish ballroom at a downtown hotel, a cavernous space dripping with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with opulent floral arrangements. A live band played smooth jazz as guests in tuxedos and gowns drifted through the room, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I allowed myself to hope. Perhaps the public part of my duties was over. Perhaps now I could just fade into the background, have a glass of champagne, and survive the next few hours. That hope evaporated the moment I saw the seating chart. It was a massive calligraphed board set on an ornate easel at the entrance. I scanned the list, my finger tracing the elegant script. The head table was a long raised dais for the bride, groom, and their parents. Tables 2 and 3, right at the foot of the dais, were for the rest of the wedding party. I saw Chloe's name, and Sarah's, and all of Lydia's other bridesmaids, paired with their respective groomsmen. I scanned the list again. My name wasn't there. My heart began to beat a little faster. I scanned the entire list of 20 tables, my eyes jumping from name to name. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. Finally, at the very bottom of the board, tucked under the list for table 22, was a small, almost apologetic line of script. Emily Carter, table 23. I had to find it on the little floor plan diagram next to the chart. Table 23. It was a tiny circle drawn in the far, forgotten corner of the room, a lonely dot separated from the constellation of other tables. It was right next to a small square labeled kitchen. The humiliation was so breathtaking in its precision, so meticulously planned, that I felt a strange, cold clarity. This was not an accident. This was not an oversight by a busy wedding planner. This was a message personally delivered by my sister. You are not one of us. You are alone. Taking a deep breath, I began the long walk. It felt like walking a gangplank. The ballroom was vast, and my table was at the opposite end. I had to navigate a maze of round tables filled with laughing, chattering people. I passed my aunts and uncles at table 5. My Uncle Robert gave me a quizzical look as if to say, "Where are you going?" I just smiled weakly and kept walking. I passed my parents' friends from the country club at table 8. They waved, their faces a mixture of confusion and pity. Each step was an agony. My heels clicked on the polished dance floor, a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. I could feel the trajectory of my journey being tracked by 100 pairs of eyes. They were all watching the maid of honor perform this bizarre, solitary pilgrimage to the back of the room, and then I saw it. Tucked away behind a large potted fern, so close to the swinging double doors of the kitchen that I could feel the draft, was table 23. It was a small cocktail table, barely large enough for 2, but it was set for only 1. One single white plate, 1 set of silverware, 1 water goblet, and 1 wine glass. 1 chair. I sank into the chair, my back ramrod straight, and placed my small purse on the empty space beside my plate. The kitchen doors swung open with a loud whoosh, and a busboy bustled out, carrying a large tray of dirty dishes. He gave me a startled look and mumbled an apology, as if he hadn't expected anyone to be sitting there. The doors swung shut again, but not before a wave of noise, clattering plates, shouting chefs, the roar of a dishwasher, washed over me. This was my view. This was my soundtrack for the evening. I sat there through the first course, a sad little salad that I pushed around my plate. The waiter, a kind-faced man in his 50s with gentle eyes, was the only person who spoke to me with any real warmth. "Can I get you some more bread, miss?" he'd ask, his voice soft with a sympathy that was almost harder to bear than the open scorn. About an hour into this quiet torture, Lydia made her grand appearance. She was making the rounds with Richard and his parents, a beaming, benevolent queen greeting her subjects. I saw them approaching from across the room and I braced myself. "There she is," Lydia announced, her voice artificially bright and loud. She stopped before my table, the magnificent train of her dress pooling around her feet. The Richardsons, a pleasant-looking couple who seemed genuinely kind, smiled at me. "Mr. and Mrs. Richardson. Richard, darling, I want you to meet my big sister, Emily," Lydia said, gesturing to me as if presenting a museum exhibit. I stood, my knees feeling weak. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "The wedding was absolutely beautiful." "You too, dear," Mrs. Richardson said warmly. "We were just saying what a lovely maid of honor you are." Lydia's smile tightened. "Oh yes, our Emily, she's wonderful." She then leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper that was perfectly audible to the tables around us. "She's the career woman of the family. So focused, so ambitious. We're all so proud, of course." She paused for dramatic effect. "We just wish she'd make a little more time for her personal life. She's still waiting on love. Bless her heart." She patted my arm. a gesture of faux sympathy that felt like a slap. The Richardsons' polite smiles faltered. They didn't know what to say. Their eyes flickered from my face to the single place setting, to the lonely chair, and I saw the moment of dawning comprehension. They understood the role I had been assigned. The poor, tragic sister. The spinster. The story Lydia was telling them was made complete by the stage she had set for me. I have a very fulfilling life, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Of course. You do, sweetie, Lydia cooed, already turning to leave. It was so important to me that you meet Emily, she said to the Richardsons, and then she swept away, leaving me standing in the cold wake of her perfectly executed character assassination. I slowly sat back down, the gazes of the nearby guests feeling like physical blows. The setup was complete. I was officially the evening's main attraction of pity. The evening wore on, a slow-motion parade of my own isolation. I sat through the toasts, a solitary figure in a sea of celebration. My father delivered a rambling, tearful speech about Lydia, his shining star. He recounted anecdotes from her childhood, the time she scored the winning goal in her soccer game, her first lead role in a school play. He spoke of her beauty, her charm, her boundless spirit. At the very end, as he raised his champagne glass, he seemed to remember I existed. And let's not forget Emily, he said, glancing vaguely in my direction, who's been such a wonderful, supportive sister through all this. We're proud of her, too. It was a verbal afterthought. A crumb of affection tossed to me in my corner, and the polite applause that followed felt thin and obligatory. I watched the first dance, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Lydia and Richard swayed in the center of the floor, bathed in a soft golden spotlight. Then she danced with my father, her head on his shoulder, both of them beaming. I watched couples drift onto the floor, husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends, all of them wrapped in their own small worlds of shared affection. From my vantage point by the kitchen doors, I was a spectator to a life I was not allowed to participate in. My table, for one, had become a symbol, a stark, physical manifestation of my otherness. I nursed a glass of wine, the acidic taste doing little to numb the ache inside me. I thought foolishly that I had hit the bottom. I believed the worst of the humiliation was over. But Lydia, I should have known, always saved her grand finale. The band took a break, and a slick, high-energy DJ took the stage. All right, party people, he shouted into the microphone. Are you ready to have some fun? A cheer went through the crowd. Okay, ladies, listen up. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. All my single ladies, I need you on the dance floor right now. It's time for the bouquet toss. A jolt of pure dread shot through me. A group of young women, mostly my cousins and Lydia's sorority sisters, shrieked with excitement and rushed to the center of the room. My immediate instinct was to make myself as small as possible. I hunched over in my chair, picked up my phone, and pretended to be engrossed in a fascinating text message, hoping to become invisible. But Lydia had planned for this. She had accomplices. Emily, there you are, a chirpy voice called out. I looked up to see Chloe, Lydia's closest friend and one of the bridesmaids. Her face was flushed with champagne and excitement. What? Are you doing hiding back here? You have to come. It's tradition. Oh no, that's all right, Chloe, I said, forcing a tight smile. You go ahead. I'll watch from here. Don't be ridiculous, she said, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. Lydia would be so upset if you didn't participate. Come on. She began to physically pull me from my chair. I resisted, planting my feet, but she was insistent and a few people were starting to look. Chloe, please, I don't want to, I whispered, my voice pleading. It'll be fun. Loosen up a little, she insisted, tugging harder. Not wanting to cause an even bigger scene, I finally relented, allowing her to drag me across the ballroom floor. It was the walk of shame all over again, but this time I was being paraded toward the very center of the spectacle. She deposited me at the back of the giggling, jostling pack of women. I was a decade older than most of them, and I felt like a frumpy, out-of-place chaperone. I crossed my arms over the hideous peach fabric of my dress and prayed for a swift end. Lydia, looking radiant and triumphant, climbed onto a chair on the stage, her back to us. She held the heavy bouquet of white peonies high in the air. The DJ began a dramatic countdown. Here we go, ladies. In 5, 4, 3. I held my breath, planning to make no move toward the bouquet, no matter where it landed. 2. Just before the DJ hit 1, Lydia did something I will never forget. She paused. She turned her head just enough to look over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the sea of eager faces. And then her gaze found mine. It locked on me with an unnerving intensity. The room seemed to fall away. It was just me and her, and the look on her face was not one of bridal joy. It was a cold, sharp, calculating look. A tiny, cruel smirk played on her lips. It was a look that communicated a clear and venomous message. "Watch this. This is for you." She turned back around. The DJ shouted, "One!" Lydia made a grand, theatrical gesture of tossing the bouquet high into the air, causing all the women in front of me to leap up, their hands outstretched. But at the last second, with a subtle, vicious flick of her wrist, she didn't toss it. She threw it, low and fast like a baseball, in the completely opposite direction. It sailed far over the heads of the main group, a white missile deliberately aimed away from me, and landed squarely in the hands of our 17-year-old cousin, who was standing off to the side, not even paying attention. The crowd erupted in a mixture of laughter and applause. They saw a clumsy, funny throw. They saw a charmingly unexpected moment. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't see the malice. They didn't see the public execution. The group of women on the dance floor dispersed, laughing as they went to congratulate our bewildered cousin. And I was left standing there, utterly alone, in the center of the room. The spotlight was on me again, but this time it was burning. The laughter echoed in my ears, and it felt like every bit of it was directed at me. My sister hadn't just made sure I didn't catch the bouquet. She had orchestrated a public performance to demonstrate that I was so pathetic, so hopelessly single, that the very idea of me being next in line for marriage was a joke worth laughing at. My chest burned with a pain so sharp it made it hard to breathe. It was a deep, physical ache of humiliation. I turned and walked back to my table, each step feeling like it was wading through thick mud. The pitying stares were back, but now they were laced with a morbid fascination. I had gone from being a sad story to being a spectacle. I sank back into my chair at table 23, the loneliest place in the world, and knew that Lydia's work was finally done. She had broken me. Back at my solitary outpost, the world seemed to tilt and blur. The vibrant sounds of the party, the thumping bass of the dance music, the clinking glasses, the cacophony of laughter, faded into a dull, distant roar, as if I were listening from the bottom of a deep well. My entire being was consumed by the searing heat of my own shame. I was in a bubble, and the air inside was thick with humiliation, making it impossible to draw a full breath. My mind was a merciless movie projector, replaying the bouquet toss on a loop. Lydia's face, turning over her shoulder. The cold, triumphant smirk that was meant only for me. The deliberate, calculated throw. The explosion of laughter from 200 guests who had no idea they were applauding an act of profound cruelty. Each replay was a fresh stab of pain. She had done it in front of everyone. My aunts, my uncles, my parents' friends, Richard's family, and 100 strangers. She had held up my loneliness and my perceived failures, and she had invited them all to have a good laugh at my expense. I risked a glance at my parents' table. They were deep in conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, smiling and laughing. Had they seen it? Had they understood the malice in their younger daughter's gesture? A sick, familiar certainty settled in my stomach. Even if they had, they would have already dismissed it. Oh, that's just Lydia being dramatic. Emily is too sensitive. My pain was always an overreaction in their eyes. My feelings were an inconvenience to the grand narrative of Lydia's perfect life. A wave of dizziness and nausea washed over me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't spend one more second in this room, under the weight of all those pitying eyes. I couldn't watch Lydia continue to revel in her victory, a victory she had so skillfully built upon the foundation of my public degradation. Every moment I remained seated at this table was another moment of surrender, another moment of silently agreeing to the role she had assigned me. My hands, which were trembling in my lap, reached for my small clutch purse. The leather felt cold and slick against my clammy skin. I'm leaving, the thought screamed in my mind. I'm just going to leave. The kitchen doors were right there. A portal to escape. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't say goodbye to anyone. I would just slip out, a ghost leaving the feast. It would be the ultimate act of my lifelong invisibility, but for the first time, it would be a choice. My choice. I pushed my chair back, the soft scrape against the floor sounding like a gunshot in my own ears. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady, like they might buckle beneath me. I took one last, sweeping look at the ballroom. It was a beautiful party. A glittering fantasy of love and happiness. But for me, it was a beautifully decorated torture chamber. I saw Lydia on the dance floor, laughing as Richard spun her around. As she turned, her eyes met mine across the room. I saw a flicker of something in her expression, a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. She saw me standing. She knew she had won. She had finally and completely broken me. And that's when the terrible, paralyzing thought struck me. It was a cold, logical trap that snapped shut in my mind. If I stay, she wins. If I leave, she still wins. The two scenarios played out in my head with horrifying clarity. If I stayed, I would have to endure the rest of the night. I'd have to watch the cake cutting, the garter toss, the happy farewell. I'd have to pretend to be okay, pasting a fake smile on my face while my insides were churning with acid. I would be the living embodiment of tragedy, the subject of hushed, sympathetic whispers for the rest of the night. Lydia's victory would be a slow, agonizing burn, and I would be forced to watch every triumphant second of it. But if I left, if I gave in to my overwhelming instinct to flee, her victory would be even more complete. My absence would be the ultimate confirmation of her narrative. I could already hear the story she would spin, her voice full of false concern. "Poor Emily," she would say to everyone. "She's just so sensitive. She was so devastated about the bouquet toss that she had to go home. I feel just terrible." My act of self-preservation would be twisted into an act of pathetic, emotional instability. I would be the crazy, lonely sister who couldn't handle a simple party. I would be the family cautionary tale for years to come. I was trapped. Every single option led to my defeat. There was no move I could make that didn't end in my humiliation. It was a perfectly designed prison. The weight of it all, the years of being overlooked, the casual cruelty, the public shaming, crashed down on me at once. My throat closed up, and I felt the hot, prickling sting of tears behind my eyes. I had held them back all night, but I couldn't anymore. One tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cold cheek. I had to get out. I didn't care about the story she would tell. The pain of staying was too acute, too immediate. It was better to be a story than to be a live exhibit. I made my decision. I would leave. I took a shaky, determined breath, my hand tightening on my purse. I turned my body toward the swinging kitchen doors, ready to take that first step toward oblivion. My night was over. My role in this family charade was finally, blessedly done. And that's when a low voice, calm and steady, spoke from right beside my ear. It was so close. So unexpected. It made my entire body jolt. "Act like you're with me." The voice was a low, masculine murmur, a stone dropping into the churning chaos of my thoughts. It was so unexpected, so impossibly close, that for a moment I thought I had imagined it. My body went rigid. I turned my head slowly, half expecting to see a sympathetic waiter or a drunken guest who had stumbled into my lonely corner. But the man standing there was neither. He was tall and composed, wearing a dark, perfectly fitted suit that seemed to absorb the garish light of the ballroom, making him appear calmer and more solid than everything around him. He had dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that were a deep, steady brown. They were fixed on me with an unnerving intensity, but there was no pity in them. It was a look of quiet assessment, of clear-eyed understanding that was more shocking than any expression of sympathy would have been. He didn't wait for me to speak. With a fluid, unhurried motion, he slid into the empty space at my table, pulling a chair from a nearby unoccupied table as if it had been waiting for him all along. He sat down, not opposite me but beside me, angling his body toward mine. He rested his arm on the back of my chair, a simple, proprietary gesture that instantly created an intimate bubble around the two of us. He had, in one smooth move, built a fortress around table 23. Who? Who are you? I finally managed to breathe, the words catching in my tight throat. A small, wry smile touched the corner of his mouth. "My name is William," he said, his voice as calm and steady as his gaze. He gestured vaguely with his head toward the bar area across the room. "I was over there, trying to get a club soda, and for the last 10 minutes, I've had a front row seat to the Poor Emily show, starring your sister." He met my eyes, and his were clear of judgment. "She's been loudly telling anyone who will listen about her tragic single sister who is so obsessed with her career that she's forgotten how to be a woman." He paused, letting the ugly words hang in the air. "I figured you might be tired of the performance. I thought you might want a new co-star." I stared at him, dumbfounded. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of shame and panic, ground to a halt. He had seen it. He had heard it. He had understood the entire ugly subtext of the evening. Most people, upon witnessing such a thing, would have averted their eyes, embarrassed for me. They would have offered a weak, pitying smile and walked away. But this man had done the opposite. He had walked directly into the fire and sat down beside me. Why? The question was a raw whisper. It was the only thing I could think to ask. Why would a complete stranger, a handsome and confident man who could be charming anyone in this room, choose to involve himself in my messy public humiliation? "Because I don't like bullies," he said, his voice low and firm. The simplicity of his answer was disarming. And what your sister is doing tonight isn't a celebration. It's a psychological assault. I thought you might appreciate some reinforcements. He settled back into his chair, looking completely at ease in my corner of shame. His presence was a tangible thing, a solid, calming weight that began to counteract the frantic, flighty energy that had been consuming me. The roaring in my ears subsided. The trembling in my hands lessened. For the first time all night, I didn't feel like I was completely alone in enemy territory. We sat in a strange, charged silence for a minute. The band launched into a loud, fast-paced dance number, but the sound seemed to wrap around our little bubble without penetrating it. William didn't push me to talk or explain. He just sat, offering a quiet solidarity that was more comforting than any words of consolation could have been. "Your name is Emily, right?" he finally asked, his tone gentle and conversational, as if we were two people meeting at a coffee shop. I could only nod, still struggling to find my voice. "Well, Emily," he said, turning to face me more fully, "if we're going to make this look convincing, I should probably know more about you than the character your sister has written for you." A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "She mentioned you have a career you're hiding behind. It sounds fascinating. Tell me about it." There it was again, a simple, direct question, delivered with genuine curiosity. No one had ever asked me about my work that way. To my family, my career was a symptom of my problems. To this stranger, it was a point of interest, a tiny rusted gear turned in my mind. I could either stay silent, trapped in my shame, or I could accept this strange, unexpected lifeline. I took a shaky breath. "I'm a project manager," I said, my voice thin but steady. "I work for a commercial construction firm." His eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of what looked like genuine respect in his eyes. "That's impressive," he said. "Managing a construction project is like conducting an orchestra of bulldozers and egos. What are you building now?" The question opened a door inside me to a room that hadn't been tainted by the evening's events, the room where I was competent and in control. "We just broke ground on a new community center," I found myself saying, the words coming more easily now. "It's a LEED-certified building. 2 stories, with a library, a gymnasium, and public meeting rooms. Before that, I oversaw the renovation of the old city library. As I spoke about the logistics, the timelines, the challenge of coordinating dozens of subcontractors, I felt a piece of my real self begin to return. I was not just Lydia's sad sister. I was a person who built things, a person who took chaos and gave it structure. William listened intently, asking smart, specific questions. He didn't just nod along, he engaged. "What's the biggest challenge with a project like that? Is it the budget? The timeline? The permits?" For the next 20 minutes, we talked. I told him about the satisfaction of seeing a building rise from an empty plot of land, of walking through a finished space that had only existed on a blueprint a year before. He told me he was a lawyer, an old friend of Richard's from law school, which explained his presence at the wedding. He specialized in contract law, and he made a few jokes about the convoluted language he had to decipher every day. The conversation was an oasis. It was normal and interesting and completely removed from the toxic drama of the wedding. With every passing minute, I felt the tight knot of shame in my chest loosen its grip. I was no longer a spectacle of pity. I was a woman having an intelligent conversation with a handsome man, and in a room full of people who had been trained to see me as a failure. That was the most rebellious act imaginable. The change in the room's atmosphere was a palpable thing, a slow shift in the collective energy. It began at the tables closest to us. The guests who had been giving me looks of either pity or morbid curiosity now watched with undisguised intrigue. Their whispers were no longer about poor Emily, but about the mysterious, handsome man who had suddenly appeared at her side. I saw a cousin lean over and whisper to her husband, who then craned his neck to get a better look at us. We had become a puzzle, and people were trying to solve it. This new current of curiosity rippled outward, table by table, until it felt like a significant portion of the ballroom was aware of the strange development in the forgotten back corner. I was no longer a sad, solitary figure. I was one half of an enigmatic couple, seemingly absorbed in our own private world. We had become a subplot in Lydia's grand production, and it was clear she hadn't written the script for it. And then, inevitably, the queen of the evening noticed. Lydia was holding court near the dance floor, basking in the glow of her adoring friends. I saw her laugh, throwing her head back, a picture of bridal perfection. Then, her eyes began a slow, deliberate sweep of her domain, likely a self-satisfied survey of the perfect party she had orchestrated. Her gaze traveled past the dance floor, over the heads of her guests, and finally landed on the back corner, on table 23, on me, and on William. The radiant smile on her face didn't just fade. It shattered. Her body went rigid. Her laughter died in her throat. For a full 5 seconds she was frozen, her champagne flute held halfway to her lips. I saw the sequence of emotions play out on her face as if in slow motion. First, stunned disbelief, then confusion. Then, a dark gathering storm of pure, unadulterated fury. This was an anomaly, a glitch in her perfectly programmed reality. I was supposed to be wilting in my corner, a testament to her superiority. I was not supposed to be smiling. I was certainly not supposed to be engaged in an animated conversation with a man like William, a man from her world, Richard's successful, handsome friend. She excused herself from her friends with a tight, brittle smile and began to move toward us. It was not a walk. It was a march. She navigated the tables with a predatory grace, her white dress a shimmering beacon of her impending wrath. The air around us seemed to crackle with tension. William saw her coming, of course. He paused in the middle of a sentence, took a slow, deliberate sip of his water, and then turned his calm, unreadable gaze upon my approaching sister. He was utterly unfazed. She arrived at our table, a vision of silk and rage. She placed her hands on her hips, a posture that, since we were children, had always signaled an imminent explosion. "Emily," she said, her voice a high, tight wire of controlled anger. She completely ignored William. "What is going on here?" "Lydia," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. William's calm was infectious. "You remember Richard's friend William?" Only then did she deign to look at him. "William, I didn't realize you and my sister knew each other." Her words were laced with accusation and suspicion. "How dare you have a connection I don't control?" Before I could invent a plausible lie, William leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxed confidence. He gave Lydia a smile that was devastatingly charming and utterly devoid of warmth. "We go way back," he said, his voice a smooth, easy baritone. "It's been years. We were just catching up." The lie was so simple, so bold, it left her sputtering. "Way back? From where?" "Emily never mentioned you." "A lifetime ago?" William said vaguely, waving a dismissive hand. He then turned his full attention back to me. "Now, Emily, you were saying something about a zoning issue?" The dismissal was so complete, so masterful it was like he had made her invisible. He had rendered the bride the center of the universe, utterly irrelevant. Lydia's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She was losing control of her party, of her narrative, of me, and she was doing it in front of an audience. She tried to wrest back her power. "Well, William, you must be so bored sitting all the way back here with the staff," she said, her words dripping with venom. "Why don't you come join us at the head table? We can find a spot for you." It was the move I had been dreading, the invitation to leave me, to abandon the ruse and join the winning team. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Of course he would accept. Why wouldn't he? But William didn't even glance at the head table. He looked at Lydia as if she were a slightly annoying child. "That's a generous offer, Lydia," he said, his voice polite but firm. "But we're perfectly happy here." Emily and I were in the middle of a very interesting conversation. "Weren't we, Emily?" He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. He was giving me the power. It was my turn to speak. I felt a surge of adrenaline. "We were," I said, my voice clear and strong. I looked directly at my sister. "We have a lot to talk about." It was a united front, a public rejection. Lydia was left standing there, her authority completely undermined. She had come over to reassert her dominance and had been gently but firmly put back in her place. She shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred, a look that promised consequences. Before spinning on her heel and stalking away, I watched her retreat, her back rigid with fury. The invincible queen had been checked. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left speechless and humiliated in her wake. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. I looked at William, the stranger who had become my unexpected ally, and a real, genuine smile spread across my face. The fortress around table 23 had held. The moment Lydia retreated, defeated, the tension that had gripped our corner of the room dissipated. It was replaced by a strange, exhilarating sense of victory. I felt light, almost giddy. The rest of the ballroom seemed to notice too. The whispers that followed Lydia's stiff-backed departure were not sympathetic to her. They were speculative, intrigued. The story of the night had developed a fascinating new chapter. As if on cue, the band transitioned from an upbeat dance number to a slow, romantic ballad. The lights dimmed, and a soft, golden glow enveloped the dance floor. Couples began to drift from their tables, drawn to the music. William stood up. He looked down at me, his expression serious but kind, and held out his hand. "I believe this is our dance, Emily," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. My breath caught. The dance floor. The scene of my most acute public shaming. My body tensed with a Pavlovian response of dread. I pictured myself back there, alone and exposed, the target of Lydia's cruel pantomime. William must have seen the flicker of panic in my eyes. His grip on my hand tightened ever so slightly. "This time will be different," he said softly, his voice a promise. "You won't be alone." I took a deep breath and let him pull me to my feet. I let him lead me away from the safety of our table, out of the shadows and into the soft light of the dance floor. This time there was no dragging, no coercion. I was walking willingly, with my head held high. I was not a victim being paraded for show. I was a woman being led to a dance by her partner. He drew me close, one hand resting firmly on the small of my back, the other enveloping mine. I was clumsy for the first few steps, my body still stiff with anxiety. But William moved with an easy, confident grace, guiding me effortlessly until my feet remembered how to follow. I relaxed into his frame, allowing his strength to support me. I rested my head on his shoulder, the rough fabric of his suit jacket a comforting anchor. We swayed to the gentle rhythm of the music, moving as one. We didn't speak. The space between us was filled with a quiet understanding that felt more profound than words. Surrounded by other couples, I didn't feel the sting of otherness. I simply felt a part of things. The simple act of inclusion, of being held with gentle respect, was a powerful balm on the wounds of the evening. It was a quiet, profound act of healing. I closed my eyes, allowing the music and the moment to wash over me, feeling the last of the icy tension in my body finally melt away. But Lydia's rage was a relentless thing. She could not stand to see me happy, not even for the length of a single song. Her jealousy was a homing missile, and it was locked on us. I saw her coming first, a flash of white moving with angry purpose through the swaying couples. Richard trailed in her wake, his face a mask of helpless anxiety. She was a shark cutting through water, and we were her target. She stopped directly in front of us, her presence a jarring intrusion into our peaceful bubble. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She tapped William hard on the shoulder, her knuckles sharp. "I'm cutting in," she snapped, her voice loud enough to turn the heads of the couples dancing nearby. It was a blatant, aggressive assertion of her perceived right to control every aspect of her wedding, including who was allowed to dance with whom. William didn't release me. He didn't even look at her at first. He held my gaze for a second longer, a silent reassurance passing between us. Then he slowly turned his head, his body still shielding mine. His expression had gone from gentle to glacial. "No," he said. The word was a quiet, solid wall. It was not open for debate. Lydia's eyes widened in disbelief. She was not used to being denied anything, especially not on her wedding day. "What did you just say to me?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. And then, William delivered the final fatal blow to her night of cruelty. He looked directly into her eyes, and his voice, though still low, was imbued with a steely authority that seemed to silence the very air around us. The nearby couples stopped dancing, their attention completely captured by the unfolding drama. "I said no," William repeated, his words slow and deliberate, each one a perfectly aimed stone. He didn't raise his voice, but his quiet condemnation was more powerful than any shout. "And if you had even an ounce of real affection for your sister," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "you wouldn't have spent this entire evening trying to publicly humiliate her." A collective gasp rippled through our audience. It was a sound of shock, of scandal, of sudden dawning comprehension. He had done it. He had said the quiet part out loud. He had taken the ugly, unspoken truth of the night and held it up for all to see. The subtext had become text. The humiliation, which I had carried like a physical cloak all evening, was gone. I felt it lift from me, light as air, and settle onto my sister's shoulders. She stood there, exposed and condemned by a stranger's words. Her own malice reflected back at her in the shocked faces of her guests. The bully had been named. Lydia's face crumpled. The anger was replaced by a flush of red, blotchy shame. She looked around wildly, but there was no support in the eyes of her audience, only judgment. She was no longer the radiant bride. She was the cruel sister caught in the act. Without another word, she grabbed a bewildered Richard by the arm, turned, and fled the dance floor, her magnificent white dress trailing behind her like a flag of surrender. William turned back to me as the music swelled. He gently pulled me closer, and we resumed our dance as if nothing had happened. A single tear, hot and cleansing, escaped from my eye and traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release, of vindication, of a justice I had never believed I would see. The queen was toppled. Her cruelty had backfired, and I was finally, miraculously, free. In the aftermath of the dance floor confrontation, a permanent change settled over the reception. The power had not just shifted, it had been fundamentally redistributed. Lydia did not return to the dance floor. She remained at the head table for the rest of an evening, a sullen, silent queen in a court that was no longer paying her much attention. The story of the night was no longer hers. It was ours. William and I danced one more song, and then he led me back to table 23. But it wasn't a corner of shame anymore. It had become the most interesting spot in the room. As the night wore on, a steady stream of guests found excuses to wander to our side of the ballroom. They came over to congratulate me, to properly introduce themselves, to ask about my work with a newfound, genuine interest. Richard's aunt, the same woman who had given me a look of deep pity hours earlier, came and sat with us for 10 minutes, asking detailed questions about the community center project. My own cousins, who had barely acknowledged my existence before, now treated me with a wide-eyed respect. With William by my side, I found a voice I didn't know I possessed. I wasn't the shy, overlooked Emily anymore. I was confident, articulate, and even funny. I spoke about my life not as a consolation prize, but as a series of choices I was proud of. William was the perfect partner, interjecting with supportive comments, asking me questions that allowed me to shine, and generally acting as if being with me was the most natural thing in the world. He wasn't pretending to be my date. He was simply being my date. From across the room, I would occasionally catch Lydia's eye. Her gaze was a mixture of pure fury and utter bewilderment. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. Her plan had been so simple: isolate Emily, humiliate Emily, reinforce Emily's status as the family failure. Instead, her cruelty had acted as a bizarre catalyst, transforming me from a wallflower into the belle of the ball. Every person who came to speak to me was another nail in the coffin of her perfect, triumphant wedding day. My parents were equally confused. I saw my mother watching me, a frown creasing her forehead. She looked lost, as if the family roles had been suddenly rewritten without her permission. For 29 years, I had been the quiet, dependable, sad one. Now I was laughing, holding my own, being admired. I think in that moment, she was forced to see me as a person separate from the role our family had assigned me, and the sight was profoundly unsettling for her. The hours flew by. William and I talked about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Chicago, the youngest of 3 brothers, and the constant, boisterous competition of his childhood. He described his love for old, black-and-white noir films, and I told him about my secret passion for gardening on my small condo balcony. We discovered a shared love for a particular obscure novelist, and a shared disdain for cilantro. It was easy, effortless. It felt less like a first meeting, and more like a reunion with a friend I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Finally, the band played their last song, and the guests began to collect their things. The magical, transformative evening was coming to an end. William walked me outside, away from the lingering goodbyes, into the cool, quiet night. The city air felt clean and fresh after the stuffy ballroom. We stood under the hotel awning, the streetlights casting a soft glow. A profound sense of gratitude, so intense it was almost painful, washed over me. I had to thank him. I had to make him understand the magnitude of what he had done. William, I started, my voice trembling slightly. I turned to face him. I don't have the words to thank you. Tonight, you have no idea. You didn't have to do any of that. Stepping in, defending me, pretending to be. My voice trailed off. He stood there, his hands in his pockets, his expression serious in the dim light. A small, gentle smile touched his lips. He took a step closer, and the space between us became charged, intimate. Emily, he said, his voice low and steady. He held my gaze, and I felt as if he could see straight into my soul. Who said it was pretend? My heart stopped. The world seemed to fall silent around me. I stared at him, trying to process his words, trying to dare to believe what they implied. When I was standing at the bar tonight, he continued softly, I didn't just hear your sister's ugly words. I saw you. You were sitting all the way in the back, alone, in a ridiculous dress, and you were holding yourself with more grace and dignity than anyone else in that entire room. I saw strength, not sadness. He paused, his eyes searching mine. I didn't come over to your table out of pity. I came over because I was intrigued. I came over because I wanted to meet the woman who could endure that kind of cruelty and still hold her head so high. The hope that bloomed in my chest was a breathtaking, terrifying thing. It was a feeling I had long since packed away. A dream I had dismissed as unrealistic. I'm in town until Sunday, he said. I was wondering if you might let me take you to dinner tomorrow night. A real dinner. No chandeliers, no family drama, no secret missions. Just you and me. A laugh, a real one, bubbled up out of me. It felt like a release. I would like that, I said, my voice filled with a light I didn't recognize. I would like that very much. He smiled, a genuine, heart-stopping smile, and pulled out his phone. I gave him my number, my fingers surprisingly steady as I typed the digits onto the screen. It felt like a sacred, monumental act. I was not just giving a man my number. I was writing the first word of a new chapter. My chapter. That night, Lydia's cruelty backfired spectacularly. She wanted me to feel small and invisible, but her actions pushed me into the path of someone who saw me more clearly than my own family ever had. She wanted to display me as a failure, but instead, I walked out stronger, seen, and, maybe, at the start of something real. If you've ever had someone's cruelty turn into karma, hit like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments.